So I'm just gonna share here a little bit about um, wildlife tracking. For perhaps some of you are familiar with this as a skill, as an art, as a science. Perhaps some of you are not. And it's a passion of mine. It's while I teach many things at the Wilderness Awareness School, wildlife tracking is kind of one of the key underpinning skill sets and tools for awareness that I enjoy and that I find to be just such a power tool for connecting people to the natural world. So I also work for an organization called Cyber Tracker Conservation, which is a funny name, but it's it was originally based off of conservation data gathering through some software. And then this evaluation process and this training process kind of evolved along with that. So that's where the cyber comes from, and cyber tracker is through conservation data gathering. And this photo that I'm showing here is from a trip that I took to the Kalahari last March, and was actually there when the news of the pandemic broke out and borders started closing. And this is kind of where I was the 21st last year after a scramble out of the Kalahari as airports were closing and flights were getting canceled. So this is kind of a poignant photo for me right now on your anniversary. But tracking is an old, very old skill set that goes way, way back to our oldest ancestors, and it's just something that humans do. While right now it is a neat hobby and it's a neat naturalist skill set and things like that, but it's also something that is in fact what helped us become the species that we are today, is this skill and this practice of pattern recognition and making stories out of patterns, so as meaningful stories that allowed us to survive way back in the day. And now what Cyber Tracker is doing and Wilderness Awareness School is doing is finding ways to keep wildlife tracking relevant in the world. And I do that in a variety of ways. So through running workshops in all sorts of different landscapes, and through both Wilderness Awareness School and through Cyber Tracker, we get all around the Pacific Northwest and beyond. While most of what I do at Wilderness Awareness School is in the west slope of the Cascades, and getting people out into some beautiful landscapes and exploring the stories of the beings that move across these places that we call home. We also get out and about into different regions of the country and into the desert and back east, and all parts of the United States is where these cyber tracker evaluations take place. So a lot of my students are from all over the country and indeed all over the world, and they're getting down in the dirt and figuring out what the stories are of our wild neighbors. And so when we think of wildlife tracking, I think a lot of people think about, let's follow a trail, let's get on this trail and go see the animal. And that is indeed a really amazing aspect of tracking. But at Wilderness Awareness School, we break it down into what we call the 6 arts of tracking. So there's different aspects that we want to look at. And one of them is who, right? Identification of the species of the animal. Another is interpretation. So asking, what is it that animal is doing? What's the story that's happening there? When did this animal come through? So how can we age the track, or how can we age the sign that we're seeing there so as to tell a better story? Really important to ask why the animal was there. Looking at the ecological patterns, the ecological context on the landscape, and why is the animal doing this here and not over there? Why do they do it in the fall and not the spring? Really helps us to broaden out of just, oh, that's a coyote track. And it helps put coyote into this much bigger ecological story. Then there's the where, right? Where has this animal been? Where is this animal going? How could I follow the sign? How could I follow the trail so that I can go and see what it's doing? I could read the story of its day. Or maybe I want to actually observe that animal. So just nature enthusiasts, photographers, research scientists, hunters, right? There's all these reasons why we might want to actually see the animal. And trailing is just amazingly fun. And of course, kids just as much of it as adults, if not more, sometimes just really love following the trails of animals and getting on all fours and crawling through salmonberry thickets and following the raccoon trails and seeing where they go. And then this last one is, I like this one a lot because it gets us out of our head and it gets us out of being too intellectual or too brainy with tracking, and it gets us into our imaginations. It really helps us tell a story. It gets us into our bodies. We want to practice moving like the animal. We want to imagine the animal. We want to like be able to air sculpt the animal and like, what does it feel like to actually be a coyote? What would it be like to follow a coyote trail all day and just really get into the mindset of coyotes? So I like this empathetic tracking piece here because it just gets it out of being too heady and too intellectual, which sometimes trackers can do when they get too into the details of breaking down a foot structure, like, oh, the track does this and this and this. So making sure that this is a holistic practice and that we're also in our bodies as well as in our minds with it all. And in the end, this really is just a practice of seeing what's there. And through good observation, we can tell good stories, and telling good stories allows us to develop a really meaningful relationship with our place. And so one little piece here to think about is data versus interpretation, right? So taking the time, especially in the beginning, to look at what am I really seeing here versus what do I think I'm seeing, or what do I want to be seeing? And I see this with a lot of people who are starting their tracking journey is it's kind of like their mind gets between their eyes and the ground. And it's already predetermined. But if we can step back and look at this like an artist, and I really like that Tree Song has this real emphasis on art in nature, because I think tracking is a visual language. And if you can start to look at tracks, and if you can start to look at trails, and if you can start to look at the bigger ecological pattern of wildlife sign on the landscape as just this beautiful piece of art, it allows us to just have a better, more pure intimacy with the sign, as opposed to, and it becomes more relational and it becomes less transactional. So really taking the time to look at what's really there. And that's, the data, the information, like what's pure. Then with slowly, with care, we apply a meaning to that. We apply an interpretation to that. We put a story on it. Even like in this photo, if it's as simple as, oh, there's these shapes that are kind of running vertical, some horizontal, that looks like there might be 5 toes there. They're kind of messy in the dirt, right? This like really pure observation before we just jump to it and say, oh, those are badger tracks. But taking the time to get intimate with them, to draw them, to photograph them, to really look at them, then we say, oh, those are badger tracks. And tracking just really takes us into the lives of these animals, right? We start to look at their feet and the way that the feet are an expression of the land, like the feet evolve. The feet are what interact with the earth, right? And so in this mountain caribou foot, that tells us a lot of story right there about how this animal lives and right why the tracks look this way, right? Because of all the ways that they've made a living in the snow where other things cannot. Right? Or the way that these mountain lion tracks on the left, right, differ from the wolf pup tracks on the right, and all the different features of that foot tell us a story. Or the bear tracks, right, and what they do and how the lives they make, and is it a grizzly bear versus a black bear, and the differences of between those two species, right? It tells us a big ecological story. The way that deer move across the landscape, and all of the ungulates, and the way the ungulate feet, right, hoofed animal feet, have evolved based off of their ecological and behavioral patterns over time. There's just such a rich abundance of story waiting to happen there. In this case, there's features here that tell us that this is a buck and not a doe, right, with that smaller rear foot in the back and the larger front foot up at the top of the photo, right? That discrepancy between the large front and the smaller rear tells us that that's a buck, right? More weight up front. So all of a sudden, these random marks on the ground just give us this insight into what's moving and how life is happening all around us. And then in the end, tracks are just these amazingly beautiful pieces of art. Like I said, like the set of very, raccoons are very common, right? But every set of tracks is completely different. Or the beautiful front track of a gray wolf, or the stunning muscular feet of raven, right? There's such beauty in this, and even if just coming at it with the artistic perspective can really really take us into a sense of place, and following the different trails, and where do the trails go, and where, can we start to predict where we would find trails. The more we know about our place, the more tracking becomes less random. We say we want to go out and find wolverine tracks, so we go to the place where wolverines hunt across the edge of avalanche slopes, and we find them there because we know, and we've done our relationship building with wolverine, or with beaver, or with grizzly bear as they mark trees, right? Or with our pileated woodpecker friends that come in, and we start to know their seasonal flows and patterns, and we start to be able to really imagine what's it like to be an animal that you follow the trail of this beautiful feline up to the edge of this lake, and you see where it's just sat and stared out across a lake as it continued on with its hunt for the day. And you just get into that empathy with the wild ones that are around us. And this is what I love about tracking, and this is what, the goal of Cyber Tracker and the Track and Sign certification is to get people. Yes, it is a certification, and there is a score you're going for, but the most important piece is the learning, is getting these file cards, getting these search images, so you can start to see more. And then in the end, so you can learn how to ask better questions and keep pulling those threads, and having the tracks and the sign of our wild neighbors that keep pulling us into the world. And the cool thing is Cyber Trackers happening all over the world, in Europe, in North America. And this is me last year in Namibia with some of the elder master trackers there, and getting out. And it's a global language. It really is, to be able to go thousands of miles away to the other side of the planet, and to be able to have a conversation using the language of tracking with these SON trackers, was just an amazing experience. And that's what I want to bring to everything I do with wildlife tracking. And definitely would love to share more with anybody that's interested. And I think there are still a few spots left in the one at Tree Song next month, and it'd be great to have some of y'all out. My contact info will be available for other programs that I run. But in the end, right, let tracking just take you out to become more of, just to increase your ecological literacy, to really tune in and be an advocate for place where you live. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there.